I never believed in demons until the night I heard a knock at the door from an empty room. My name is Ethan, a newly assigned forest ranger at a small station deep within Blackwood National Forest. By day, this place is a peaceful haven with birds singing and the wind rustling through the treetops. But when night falls, everything becomes entirely different. I never imagined I would have to experience what I'm about to recount, a series of events that keep me awake every night. On my first day here, I realized that this ranger station was even older than I had imagined. Rotten wooden walls, weak flashlights, and a musty odor filled the air. The regional manager simply said, "Don't go outside after 9 p.m. He offered no further explanation, but his eyes seemed to warn of something I could not understand at the time. That night, I sat in a small living room, trying to read a book to dispel the loneliness. At exactly 9 p.m., everything fell eerily silent. There were no insects chirping, no rustling of leaves, only the thick darkness enveloping the house. Then suddenly, I heard a knock at the door. Knock, knock, knock. 3 distinct beats echoing from the hallway on the second floor. My heart skipped a beat. Strangely, the second floor was completely empty. No one lived there. I told myself that perhaps it was just a branch hitting the window, but the sound continued, louder and more insistent. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to control my fear, and ascended the stairs one step at a time. Each step felt weighed down by the deadly silence of the house. When I reached the door at the end of the hallway, the knocking stopped. But then, from inside the empty room, I heard a hoarse whisper, "Open up!" I stood motionless before the second floor door, gripping my flashlight so tightly that my palms were drenched in sweat. That hoarse voice still echoed in my head, "Open the door." But what chilled me the most was that the sound did not come from outside the room. It seemed to come from inside. How could that be? This room had been locked for many years, according to the manager. I tried to reassure myself that I was only imagining things. Perhaps the stress and isolation of the forest had caused me to mishear. But as I turned to step down the stairs, the knocking resumed. This time louder, more urgent. Each knock struck my heart like a blow. Knock! 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 Unable to bear it any longer, I decided to investigate. I approached the door and reached out to touch the doorknob. It was freezing cold, as if it had just been placed under a layer of frost. I took a deep breath and turned the doorknob slightly. The door creaked open with a terrible, eerie sound. Inside was a dark room, full of dust and cobwebs. The weak light from my flashlight was only enough to illuminate a small portion of the space. Rotten wooden walls, a floor covered with dry leaves and debris. But what made me freeze was an old wooden chair in the middle of the room. On it lay a black leather journal, bound with rope, as if someone had deliberately left it for me to find. I stepped in, my legs trembling with each step. When the flashlight beam fell on the journal, I saw the scrawled, frenzied writing on the cover. William Harper's Journal, Head Ranger, 1947. I had never heard that name before, but a strange feeling began to creep into my mind. I picked up the journal, and at that moment, the flashlight suddenly went out. In the absolute darkness, I heard a clear sigh right behind me. Panicked, I spun around, but I saw nothing. Only thick darkness enveloped everything. I quickly turned the flashlight back on, but its light was no longer strong. It flickered, as if it were about to run out of battery. At that moment, I saw a vague silhouette reflected on the far wall. It was the figure of a man in an old ranger uniform. His face blurred as if erased. He stood motionless, his empty eyes fixed on me. "Thou should not be here," the hoarse voice spoke again, but this time it echoed throughout the room, as if coming from all directions. I wanted to scream, but my throat was choked. The figure began to move slowly toward me. I stepped back, bumping into a chair and collapsing onto the floor. The journal fell from my hand, opening wide. In the feeble light of my flashlight, I saw the scrawled, frenzied lines. "They know what I've done. They will not leave me alone. Run if you can." On the bottom of the page was a simple drawing, a large eye with small drops of blood falling from it. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps echoing from the lower floor corridor. "William Harper died here in 1947. The cold voice continued to echo. "And now, you will be the next." I scrambled up, rushed out of the room, and ran down the stairs. But when I reached the front door, I realized that I could not open it, as if something was holding it shut from the outside. The footsteps grew closer. I turned around and saw the silhouette of William Harper standing at the end of the hallway, his empty eyes staring straight at me. Then everything sank into darkness. I stood frozen before the front door, my hand gripping the icy handle. The footsteps grew closer, heavy and steady, as if counting down to the moment I would face the inevitable. William Harper's figure became clearer in the flickering beam of my flashlight, his hollow eyes seeming to pierce straight through my soul. "You cannot escape," the hoarse voice echoed once more, but this time it did not come only from the hallway. It resonated throughout the entire house, as if the very space around me was closing in. A chilling cold wrapped around my body, though the temperature outside had already dropped below freezing. In a panic, I turned to scan the living room, desperately searching for any possible escape route. But every window was locked tight, and when I tried smashing the glass with a wooden chair, it didn't even crack. It felt as though this house was no longer an ordinary place. It had become a death trap. The footsteps stopped right behind me. I didn't dare turn around, but I could feel the icy breath against the back of my neck. Then suddenly, a freezing hand gripped my shoulder. I screamed and struggled, but the grip only tightened, pulling me back. In front of me was the blurred, distorted face of William Harper, his hollow eyes now glowing a deep, ominous red. "You know my sins. You will pay the price as well," he whispered, his voice as heavy as soil falling onto a grave. I thrashed in desperation, but my body felt paralyzed. A sharp pain spread through me as strange images flashed in my mind, of a man hanging from an ancient tree, blood dripping onto the ground, and cruel laughter echoing through the forest. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The icy grip vanished, and I collapsed onto the floor. When I looked up, William Harper was gone. But the whispers now surrounded me from every corner of the house. "Run! Run while you still can!" I sprang to my feet and dashed up the stairs, hoping to find another way out. But when I opened the door to the room I had just left, I realized it had completely changed. It was no longer a dusty, decayed space. Now, it appeared as a vivid recreation of the past. The wooden walls were clean, the floor polished, and the old wooden chair had been replaced by a neat desk. On the desk sat a black and white photograph of William Harper, standing beside a group of other rangers. But what made my blood run cold was the handwritten inscription beneath the photo: "Traitors will pay the price." I realized William Harper was not alone. He had been part of a group of rangers who had done something unspeakable in the past, and now they wanted to drag me into their cursed legacy. The sound of footsteps returned from behind me. I turned and saw not just one, but 3 spectral figures in ranger uniforms. Their faces were twisted, covered in blood. They moved toward me, their glowing red eyes locking onto mine. I backed away until I hit the freezing wall. There was no way out. "You will never leave this place," they spoke in unison, their voices like 1,000 knives slicing through the air. Then they reached for me as if to pull me into the darkness. Just then, a sharp ringing sound broke through the air. It was my phone, vibrating in my pocket. It was a call from the district manager, reminding me that today was the last day of my assignment. But when I looked up, the ghosts were gone, and the room had reverted to its previous state, dusty, covered in cobwebs, and eerily silent. I don't remember how I got out of that house, but ever since that night, every time I close my eyes, I still hear the whisper, "You cannot escape." When the phone rang for the second time, it was as if I had awakened from a nightmare. I hastily pulled out my phone and answered the call. The area manager's urgent voice came through. "Ethan, are you okay? We just received a report about a landslide near your ranger station. You need to get out of there immediately." Those words were like a light at the end of the tunnel, pulling me back to reality. There was no time to think. I bolted down the stairs as fast as I could. When I reached the front door, the same door that had refused to open before, it suddenly swung open with ease, as if it had never been locked. I didn't look back. I just ran straight into the dark forest, my dim flashlight barely piercing the thick veil of night. The wind howled in my ears, but I could feel it. Something was following me. Those heavy footsteps echoed once more, drawing closer and closer. I didn't dare turn around. I just ran, pushing forward until at last I saw the faint glow of rescue vehicle lights in the distance. The area manager and the rescue team found me exhausted, my clothes torn, my face pale. They asked what had happened, but I couldn't find the words. All I could do was shakily point back toward the ranger station. As they helped me into the truck, I glanced back one last time. In the darkness, between the trees, I saw them, 3 shadowy figures standing motionless, their glowing red eyes locked onto me. They didn't follow, but their gaze said it all. We will meet again. The next day, I was informed that the ranger station had been completely destroyed in the landslide. There was no trace left of the old house or the secrets buried within it. But ever since that night, I have been unable to sleep peacefully. Every night, I hear the whispers, the footsteps, and the burning gaze of William Harper. I have left my job as a ranger, but this story and the terrifying memories will haunt me forever. Perhaps I was not the only victim. Perhaps others before me have faced the same horrors I endured. But one thing is certain: Blackwood never forgives those who trespass into its domain. Never walk into the forest alone, unless you want it to keep you forever. My name is Lucas, a newly assigned park ranger at Pine Hollow National Forest, a place the locals call the Whispering Woods because of the eerie stories about whispers echoing from deep within the trees. By day, it's just an ordinary forest with winding trails and the sounds of nature. But when night falls, everything changes. On my first day, I didn't think much of the rumors. I told myself they were just products of overactive imaginations. But then, on my very first night patrol along Trail 7, I started hearing something strange, faint whispers, as if someone was speaking from a distance, yet close enough to make my skin crawl. At first, I dismissed it as the wind rustling through the leaves, but when I stopped to listen closely, I realized it was voices, indistinct murmurs, fragmented syllables blending together. The most terrifying part was that they seemed to be moving, circling me in the darkness. Then suddenly, amidst the chaotic whispers, a chilling voice spoke clearly. "Lucas, follow me." I froze. How did they know my name? No one outside of the district manager even knew I was stationed here. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination, but the whispers only grew louder, clearer. "Do not be afraid. We only want to help you uncover the truth." The truth? What truth? I had never set foot in this forest before, nor was I connected to any of its legends. But as I shone my flashlight toward the source of the whispers, I saw a single footprint pressed into the earth, too large for a human, yet unlike any animal I had ever known. "Follow me," the voice urged again, this time more insistent. I felt an invisible force tugging at my legs, pulling me forward, even as every instinct screamed for me to run. I struggled against the force pulling me forward, but my legs no longer felt like my own. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the forest like a haunting chorus. Each step I took left a clear imprint on the ground, yet when I looked back, my footprints vanished instantly, as if something was erasing them. "Do not resist," the chilling voice urged. "We only want you to see the truth." The truth? I had no idea what they meant, but I was certain I did not want to find out. Yet, I had no choice. The flashlight in my hand flickered, its beam dimming before finally going out. In the absolute darkness, the whispers became more vivid than ever. They did not come from one direction. They surrounded me from all sides, pressing against me like an invisible wall. As I took a few more steps, I realized I was now standing before a massive ancient tree. Its dark trunk was covered in moss, with strange symbols deeply carved into the wood. The markings emitted a faint glow, as if holding some unknown power. I hesitantly reached out and touched the bark, and immediately a chilling surge ran down my spine. Visions flooded my mind. Figures in ancient robes gathered around the tree, their mouths murmuring eerie incantations. Then the scene shifted to a gruesome murder, blood pooling at the tree's roots, screams piercing the forest. "Do you see now?" A raspy voice whispered, much closer this time. I spun around to find a shadowy figure standing just a few feet away. A tall man, his face blurred as if erased, but his glowing red eyes bore into mine. "They did this to us," he murmured, his voice as deep and heavy as earth tumbling into a grave. "And now you are part of it too." I didn't understand his words, but an unfamiliar guilt crept into my mind, an inexplicable sense that I had been involved in these horrors before. I stepped back, but with every move I made, the ancient tree seemed to grow larger, swallowing the forest whole. Then suddenly, the sound of a child's crying echoed from behind the tree. The sobs were filled with pain and desperation, compelling me to move forward. As I rounded the massive trunk, I saw a small girl crouched on the ground, her clothes tattered, her face smeared with dirt. She looked up at me, her dark, hollow eyes empty of life, and whispered, "You have to help me. They trapped me here." Before I could react, she vanished in an instant, leaving only a silver bracelet lying in the dirt. I picked it up, and immediately the whispers erupted into chaos. Ghostly figures emerged from all directions, their eyes burning with fury as they advanced toward me. "You cannot escape," they chanted in unison, their voices like 1,000 tortured souls screaming inside my mind. A freezing cold engulfed my body, and then everything faded into darkness. When I regained consciousness, I found myself leaning against the ancient tree, the silver bracelet still clenched tightly in my hand. Around me, the ghosts stood in a tight circle, their glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness like hundreds of headlights in the night. The whispers were no longer fragmented. They had merged into a single voice, echoing like thunder inside my head. "You have chosen this path," the cold, unified voice declared. "There is no turning back." I tried to stand, but my body felt as if it had been nailed to the ground. A heavy, icy sensation spread through my limbs, rendering me immobile. The ghosts inched closer, their faces twisted and bloodied, as if they had just endured a horrific massacre. One of them, the man with the burning red eyes whom I had seen before, stepped forward and knelt before me. "You know your sins," he whispered, his freezing breath chilling my skin. "You have forgotten, but the forest never forgets." I didn't understand what he meant. I had never done anything wrong in this forest, or at least I thought so. But as I stared into his glowing red eyes, flashes of strange memories flooded my mind. Visions of myself dressed in ancient garments, standing among a group of people performing a brutal ritual beneath the very same tree. Blood ran in streams, and screams echoed through the woods. Then I saw myself, or rather, another version of me from the past, holding a blood-stained dagger, chanting an eerie incantation. "No, that's not me!" I screamed, trying to deny what I was seeing. But the voices grew stronger, now filled with anger and condemnation. "You betrayed us, you abandoned us, now you will pay the price." The ghosts reached out for me, their icy hands grasping at my skin as if to drag me into the darkness. I struggled, but my body refused to move. A searing pain shot through me as their hands made contact, freezing my flesh to the bone. I screamed in agony, but my cries were swallowed by the deafening silence of the forest. Just then, the little girl I had seen beneath the tree appeared again. This time, she was no longer curled up in fear. She stood at the center of the ghostly circle, her tear-streaked face solemn, her dark, empty eyes unwavering. She raised her hand and shouted, "Stop! He does not belong to you!" A blinding light suddenly erupted from the silver bracelet in my hand, forcing the ghosts back. They screamed in torment as their forms began to dissipate into the darkness. The girl turned to me, her eyes now filled with sorrow. "Run," she whispered. "The forest will not forgive you if you stay." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted into the darkness, not knowing where I was going. The whispers still echoed behind me, but they grew fainter with each passing moment. When I finally saw the distant glow of the rescue team's flashlights, I collapsed onto the ground, exhausted and trembling. But even as I escaped the forest, I could still feel it. Something was watching me, from afar, from deep within the shadows. When the rescue team found me, I was curled up on the ground, my clothes tattered and my face pale. They asked me what had happened, but I couldn't say a word. All I could do was tremble and point toward Pine Hollow Forest, the place where the whispers still echoed in my mind. The next day, when I woke up in the hospital, I tried to recount everything to the area manager. But he only shook his head, saying that no one had ever heard of a massive ancient tree or any rituals taking place in that forest. "Maybe you were just hallucinating from the stress," he said, but there was doubt in his eyes. I decided to return to the forest to search for the truth. But when I arrived, the ancient tree was gone. There was no trace of it, only an empty clearing overgrown with wild grass. Yet what chilled me to the bone was the silver bracelet I had picked up that night. It was still in my pocket, and when I held it up, I noticed a small inscription on the inside: "They will never forgive." From that moment on, my life was never the same. Every night, I dreamed of the whispers, the girls' cries, and the glowing red eyes of the spirits. I moved to a distant city, hoping that distance would free me from the nightmares. But no matter where I went, I always felt something watching me, from afar, from deep within the darkness. A year later, I received an anonymous letter. It contained only one sentence: "The forest never forgets." Attached was a photograph of the ancient tree, the exact same tree I had seen that night. But there was one difference. In the photo, I was standing beneath the tree, my face distorted, my eyes hollow. Now I know I can never escape. No matter where I go, Pine Hollow Forest will always call my name. And one day, I will have to return. I never believed a single day could last forever until I became trapped in one. My name is Jake, a park ranger assigned to a small outpost deep within the Frostbite mountain range. It's a remote place surrounded by endless snow and towering cliffs. During the day, everything is simply quiet. The wind howling through the rocks, the sound of reindeer hooves crunching against the snow, and the faint sunlight piercing through the icy mist. But when night falls, the silence becomes unsettling. On my first day here, I noticed something strange. The wall clock inside the outpost would rewind itself every time the minute hand reached midnight. At first, I dismissed it as a mechanical glitch, until I realized that it wasn't just the clock. The entire world around me was resetting. When I woke up the next morning, everything was exactly the same as the day before. The calendar still displayed February 14th. My untouched breakfast remained on the table, and even my footprints in the snow had vanished as if I had never stepped outside. Then, out of nowhere, I heard whispers coming from the wall behind me. "You cannot escape the loop," a cold voice murmured. Panic surged through me as I bolted for the door, desperate to find help. But the main entrance was locked tight, and my phone had no signal. Every time I tried to change something, breaking a window, setting a fire to signal for rescue, everything would reset the moment the clock struck midnight. It was as if I was trapped in an endless time loop, and the only thing that changed were the strange memories beginning to surface in my mind. When I tried to understand why I was trapped, I began to realize that a mysterious entity was watching me. Every night, just before the clock struck midnight, I would hear heavy footsteps echoing throughout the ranger station. These were not human footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and seemed to come from every direction at once. Then one night, I saw him, a man in a thick coat standing outside my window. His face was distorted, his eyes hollow, and his mouth twisted into a haunting grin. He said nothing, just stood there, staring at me. When I shone my flashlight on him, his figure dissolved into thin air. But the most terrifying thing was when I looked back at the calendar on the wall. The date was no longer February 14th. It had changed into a glowing red message: "You will pay the price." Determined to uncover the truth about the ranger station, I searched through the desk drawers and found an old, weathered journal. It belonged to a ranger named Henry, who had mysteriously vanished in 1967. In it, he described witnessing a tragic accident in the mountains, a group of miners buried under an avalanche. Henry felt guilty for failing to save them, and from that moment on, he began hearing whispers and seeing ghosts. The final page of the journal contained a single scrawled sentence: "They want me to stay. They will not let me leave." Just as I finished reading the last words, the clock struck midnight. The entire room began to shake, and ghostly figures emerged inside the station. They were the miners who had died in the accident long ago, their faces twisted and bloodied. They moved closer, their glowing red eyes locking onto mine. "You have chosen to stay," they spoke in unison. "Now you will pay for the sins of another." When I realized I could not escape the time loop, fear began to creep into every corner of my mind. Each night, as the clock neared midnight, the heavy footsteps echoing throughout the ranger station grew closer. I desperately searched for a way to break the loop, shattering mirrors, burning the old journal, even harming myself to see if it would change anything. But it was all useless. The moment the clock struck 12, everything reset as if nothing had ever happened. Then, one night, as I sat in the station's small living room, I saw a blurry figure appear outside the window. It was a man in a thick coat, his face distorted, his eyes glowing red. He did not move, just stood there, staring at me. When I shined my flashlight at him, his form dissolved into thin air. But immediately after, a whisper came from the wall behind me. "You cannot escape." I turned around and saw them, ghostly figures emerging into the room. They were the miners who had died in the long-forgotten accident, their faces twisted and smeared with blood. They advanced toward me, their crimson eyes locking onto mine. One of them, the same man I had seen through the window, stepped forward and leaned in close. "You chose to stay," he murmured, his voice as deep as falling earth. "Now you will pay for the sins of another." Panic surged through me as I struggled to move, but my body was frozen. The spirits reached out, their icy hands grasping my skin. A searing pain spread through me, and I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the forest's deafening silence. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it. A massive iron gate standing alone in the snow-covered woods. It had not been there before, yet now it appeared as the only possible escape. I ran toward it, my heart pounding, but as my fingers touched the handle, a deep voice echoed, "You cannot run." The gate creaked open, and I stepped into complete darkness. Inside was an empty room with a large mirror hanging on the wall. When I looked into it, I saw my own reflection, but my face was no longer my own. It was twisted, my eyes glowing red, my lips curled into a sinister grin. "You have become one of us," the voice whispered coldly. "Now, you will live in this loop forever." I tried to resist, but my body was no longer mine. The darkness consumed me, and when I opened my eyes again, I was back in the ranger station. February 14th, unchanged, as if nothing had ever happened. But this time, something was different. I was no longer myself. As I looked into the mirror, my face remained distorted, my eyes still burned with an eerie glow. I had become part of the very force that had trapped me in this endless nightmare. I don't know how long I've been trapped in this loop. Each passing day, I try to find a way out, but all my efforts are in vain. The ghosts still appear every night, and the whispers still echo in my mind. But the most terrifying thing is that I'm beginning to lose my sense of self. I no longer remember who I am, where I came from, or why I'm trapped here. One day, I received an anonymous letter. There was no indication of who had sent it to the ranger station. Inside, there was only a single sentence: "Time does not forgive those who abandon the past." Along with it was a photograph of the miners who had died years ago. But there was one difference. In the picture, I was standing among them, my face twisted and my eyes hollow. Now I know I can never escape. No matter what I do, I will remain trapped in this endless loop, one day stretching into eternity, where past and present intertwine in an unending nightmare. But the strangest thing happened one night. As I sat in the cabin's living room, I heard a knock at the door. I assumed it was just one of the ghosts, but when I opened it, I saw a stranger standing in the snowy night. He wore a black suit and carried an old, worn-out suitcase. "I can help you escape this place," he said, his deep voice filled with authority. "But you must pay the price." I didn't know who he was, but I had no other choice. I agreed and followed him into the darkness. He led me to a cave deep within the mountains, where a strange ritual awaited. He instructed me to place my hand on a polished black stone and recite an eerie incantation. As the ritual ended, I felt a surge of energy coursing through my body. I thought I had been freed, but when I returned to the ranger station, I realized that everything remained unchanged. The loop continued, but now I was no longer the victim. I had become the enforcer, trapping other souls within it. And then I understood the truth. No one can escape this loop, except by becoming part of it. I never believed that darkness could see until it stared back at me. My name is Ethan, a freelance photographer specializing in capturing the beauty of untamed nature. One day I received a unique assignment to photograph Black Hollow National Forest, a place the locals ominously call the Forest of Eyes. By day, it seemed like any other woodland, with winding trails and the soothing sounds of nature. But when night fell, everything changed. The park ranger warned me not to stay overnight, but I dismissed it as mere superstition. I decided to set up camp in a clearing near a small lake. As darkness settled, an eerie sensation crept over me. Every time I shone my flashlight into the trees, I felt the unmistakable presence of unseen eyes watching me. Yet when I turned, there was nothing. Then suddenly, I saw them. Glowing red eyes emerging from the darkness, just a few meters away. They did not move. They only stared. I tried to convince myself they belonged to animals, but there was something too intelligent, too unnerving about their gaze. "Don't look back," a voice whispered inside my head. "If you do, you'll never leave this place." I tried to ignore it, but when I turned back again, the red eyes had moved closer. They were no longer standing still. They were advancing toward me, slowly, deliberately, surrounding me in the darkness. As I struggled to stay calm, I realized that these glowing red eyes did not belong to a single creature. They belonged to many. Some were high above the ground, as if belonging to a massive beast. Others were lower, like those of children. All of them were fixated on me, their gaze filled with pure hatred. Then suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps echoing through the forest. They were not human, slow, steady, and seemingly coming from every direction at once. I tried to run back to my campsite, but when I arrived, everything was gone. No tent, no camera, no trace that I had ever been there. "You cannot escape," the whisper came again, much closer this time. "We only want you to see the truth." The truth? What truth? I had never set foot in this forest before, had no connection to its stories. But as I shined my flashlight toward the lake, I saw my reflection, and my face had changed. It was distorted, eyes glowing red, lips curled into a monstrous grin. "You chose this path," the voice said coldly. "Now you will pay the price." Panic surged through me as I tried to flee, but with every step I took, the red eyes closed in. They were no longer motionless. They were moving swiftly toward me, hunting me. Then suddenly, I saw a narrow path leading to an old wooden cabin. I thought I had found salvation, but as I approached, I realized something was terribly wrong. The windows were pitch black, no light inside, and a rancid stench seeped from every crack. "Go inside," the whisper urged. "The truth awaits." I pushed the door open, and a wave of freezing air engulfed me. Inside, everything was ancient and covered in dust. But what made my blood run cold was the wooden table in the center of the room. On it lay a black leather-bound book tied shut with rope, its cover bearing the same eerie red eyes as those in the forest. As I opened the book, strange visions flooded my mind. A group of people dressed in archaic robes gathered around a massive tree, chanting in an unknown tongue. Then the scene shifted. A brutal sacrifice, blood pooling at the tree's roots and screams echoing through the woods. "Do you see now?" The voice whispered, this time coming from the book itself. "You are part of it." As I struggled to escape the wooden cabin, I realized that the glowing red eyes did not just exist in the darkness. They were slowly taking shape into grotesque entities. Distorted figures began to emerge around me, as if molded from the very shadows. They had no distinct faces, yet their burning red eyes followed my every movement. "You chose this path," the cold voice echoed, this time from all directions. "Now you must face the consequences." Panic surged through me as I tried to run outside, but the moment my hand touched the doorknob, the door vanished, replaced by a solid wooden wall. I turned back toward the book on the table. New words had appeared. "Write down your name." For some reason, I felt an overwhelming urge to obey. I picked up the pen and wrote my name on the page. Instantly, the book glowed, and a powerful energy surged through my body. When I looked up, I was no longer in the cabin. I was standing in the middle of an unfamiliar forest, where the sky was pitch black and the wind howled through the trees like deathly whispers. But the most terrifying thing was when I looked down at the ground. I saw countless footprints imprinted in the dirt, all leading toward me. With every step I took, the footprints moved closer, as if something unseen was hunting me from all directions. Then suddenly, I saw it, a massive ancient tree deep within the forest. Its bark was dark and glossy, covered in moss and strange symbols carved deep into the wood. The symbols glowed faintly, as if containing an unknown energy. I hesitantly reached out and touched the tree, and immediately a chilling surge of electricity shot through my spine. Visions flooded my mind, images of myself in ancient robes, standing among a group of people performing a gruesome ritual beneath the massive tree. Blood flowed in rivers and screams echoed through the forest. Then I saw myself, or rather another version of me from the past, holding a blood-stained dagger, chanting in an eerie, unknown language. "No, this isn't me!" I screamed, trying to reject what I was seeing, but the voices only grew louder, now unified and threatening. "You betrayed us. You abandoned us. Now you will pay." Ghostly figures began to emerge from all directions, their eyes filled with hatred. One of them, the man with the glowing red eyes I had seen before, stepped forward and knelt before me. "You know your sins," he whispered, his cold breath chilling my skin. "You have forgotten, but the forest never forgets." I didn't understand what he meant. I had never done anything wrong in this forest, at least that's what I believed. But as I stared into his burning red eyes, the visions returned. Myself in ancient robes, standing among the group, chanting at the foot of the massive tree. Blood spilled in torrents, screams filled the air. And then I saw myself again, holding the blood-stained dagger, lips moving in a twisted prayer. When I regained consciousness, I found myself leaning against the ancient tree, the black book still clutched tightly in my arms. Around me, the ghosts stood in a tightly enclosed circle, their glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness like hundreds of headlights in the night. The whispers were no longer scattered. They had merged into a single voice, echoing like thunder inside my head. "You chose this path," the cold, unified voice declared. "You cannot turn back." I tried to stand, but my legs felt as if they were nailed to the ground. A heavy, freezing sensation spread through my limbs, rendering me motionless. The ghosts began to move closer, their faces distorted and covered in blood, as if they had just endured a gruesome massacre. One of them, the man with the burning red eyes I had seen before, stepped forward and knelt before me. "You know your sins," he whispered, his icy breath chilling my skin. "You have forgotten, but the forest never forgets." I didn't understand what he meant. I had never done anything wrong in this forest, at least that's what I thought. But as I gazed deeper into his glowing red eyes, strange visions resurfaced in my mind. Myself dressed in ancient robes, standing among a group performing a brutal ritual beneath the massive tree. Blood flowed in torrents and screams echoed through the forest. Then I saw myself, or rather, another version of me from the past, holding a blood-stained dagger, chanting in a bizarre, forgotten language. "No, this isn't me!" I screamed, desperately trying to deny what I was seeing. But the voices only grew louder, this time stronger and more menacing. "You betrayed us. You abandoned us. Now you will pay." The ghosts reached out toward me, as if trying to pull me into the darkness. I struggled, but my body was completely paralyzed. A searing pain shot through me as their freezing hands touched my skin. I screamed in agony, but my cries were swallowed by the eerie silence of the forest. At that moment, a child's cry echoed from behind the tree. It was a sound of pain and despair, pulling me toward it. I forced myself to move, circling around the massive trunk, and there, crouched on the ground, was a small girl. Her clothes were tattered, her face streaked with dirt. She looked up at me with hollow, pitch-black eyes and whispered, "You have to help me. They trapped me here." Before I could react, she vanished in an instant, leaving behind a silver bracelet on the ground. I picked it up, and immediately, the whispers erupted into complete chaos. The ghosts began to emerge from all directions, their eyes burning with rage. "You cannot escape," the chorus of voices roared, as if hundreds of tormented souls were screaming inside my mind. I felt the icy grip of the darkness closing in around me, and then everything went black. When night fell, we realized the ones watching us were not human. I still remember that fateful night, the night when everything I had ever believed about the world completely shattered. My name is Jack Harper, a Green Beret with Delta Force, and our mission seemed simple: infiltrate the dense jungles of Southeast Asia to scout a group of insurgents believed to be hiding there. But none of us could have imagined that the greatest enemy we would face was not human. It was an oppressively hot evening. The jungle air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. We set up a makeshift camp beneath towering ancient trees where the firelight barely illuminated the small clearing around us. Everything seemed calm, except for the relentless buzzing of insects and the wind whispering through the canopy. But then, around midnight, everything changed. At the time, I was on watch with Marcus, a veteran sniper on our team. Suddenly, he froze, his eyes widening as he stared into the distant darkness. "Jack," Marcus whispered, his voice unsteady. "Do you see that?" I followed his gaze, and that was when I saw them, a line of figures dressed in tattered military uniforms, moving slowly but completely silently through the trees. Their uniforms looked like they were from the 60s, torn and caked in mud. But the most terrifying thing was, they made no sound at all. No footsteps, no whispers, nothing. We tried calling out to them, but they didn't react. Then, when Danny, a young member of our team, decided to step out of the camp to approach them, things took a horrifying turn. He vanished in an instant, as if swallowed by the darkness. And then the footsteps began to echo all around us, relentless, unceasing. The whispers followed, as if they were hunting us. I remember every detail of that night. A moonless night, the sky pitch black as if covered by a thick shroud. There was no light except for the weak campfire we struggled to maintain, warding off both darkness and insects. We were deep in the jungle, where GPS was useless, its signals completely blocked by towering ancient trees. The temperature had dropped unnaturally low for a tropical climate, causing our breaths to condense into thin mist in the air. When Danny disappeared, the whole team panicked. We shouted his name, swept our flashlights across the area, but were met only with the terrifying silence of the jungle. Those footsteps, the ones we had initially dismissed as an illusion, were now clearer than ever. They echoed steadily, as if someone was circling us, step by step. "We need to get out of here immediately," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "If they really are ghosts, we have no chance of fighting them." But Captain Ryan shook his head. "No, we can't abandon the mission. Besides, if we move at night, our survival rate will be 0. Hold position and wait until morning." Ryan's words did little to reassure anyone. I glanced around, my flashlight cutting through the underbrush, but all I saw was endless darkness, and then I heard it, a whisper so faint yet chilling enough to freeze me in place. "They're all dead. All of them are dead." The voice came from nowhere. It echoed directly into my head, cold and full of anguish. I turned to Marcus, but he didn't seem to hear it. Or maybe he was pretending he hadn't. Then things got worse. Around 1 a.m., we started to realize that the figures, the ghostly patrol, were no longer just standing still. They were moving around the camp. Occasionally, they appeared just a few meters away, their faces hazy in the firelight. They didn't look at us, but I could feel that they knew we were there. Some of the team members started firing at them, but the bullets passed right through as if they weren't real. Only laughter responded, an eerie, inhuman laughter that I knew would haunt me forever. "Turn off the flashlights," Ryan ordered. "They're following the light?" We obeyed. The fire began to die down, and darkness swallowed us completely. But it didn't help. Now, we had only our hearing to rely on, and that made everything far worse. The footsteps grew closer, mixed with the rustling of leaves and the ceaseless whispers. "Join us! Join us!" Another voice spoke, louder this time, closer. I spun around, and that was when I saw Danny. He stood about 10 meters away, his face pale, his eyes completely black. He raised a hand toward me, his lips moving, but no sound came out. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt like it was being crushed. "Jack, don't look at him!" Marcus yanked me back, but it was too late. Danny, or whatever was pretending to be Danny, started walking toward us. With each step he took, strange marks appeared on the ground, charred footprints, as if the earth was burning beneath him. Ryan pulled out his gun and shot straight at Danny, but the bullets passed through him like air. Danny laughed, a warped, unnatural sound unlike anything I had ever heard. Then he vanished, leaving us in utter panic. "We have to get out of here," Marcus shouted. But just as we began packing up, a dense wall of fog suddenly rolled in, swallowing the entire area. No matter which direction we ran, all we could see was mist and darkness. And within that fog, the ghostly patrol kept marching, guiding us deeper into a trap with no escape. The thick fog engulfed everything. No more campfire, no more flashlights, only darkness and the sound of footsteps echoing through the jungle. We were trapped in an invisible maze where every step led to despair. The ghostly patrol was still there, marching in silence yet exuding an overwhelming presence, as if they were waiting for us to make our final mistake. "We have to do something," Marcus shouted, his voice trembling. "We can't just stand here and wait to die." Ryan, our captain, tried to stay calm. He pulled a compass from his pocket, but the needle spun wildly, pointing in no particular direction. "The compass is useless too," he said, his voice dropping. "We're lost in this space." I looked around, desperately searching for any sign of an escape, but all I saw was fog and darkness. And then I heard it, a whisper, clearer than ever before. "You do not belong here. Return the souls to us." The voice came from everywhere, as if the air itself was speaking. A coldness seeped into my bones, freezing my legs in place. Shadowy figures began to emerge from the mist, not just the ghostly patrol, but others as well. Soldiers, women, children, all dressed in tattered clothing from the 1960s. Their faces were distorted, their eyes completely black, and their mouths gaped open in an endless, murmuring chant. "What do they want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ryan looked at me, his eyes tense. "They want our souls." And then chaos erupted. A loud explosion rang out from the distance, like someone had triggered a landmine. The fog began to thin, revealing a horrifying sight. A group of soldiers, those wearing the old uniforms, gathered around a massive pit in the middle of the jungle. Inside the pit, hundreds of skeletal remains lay piled atop one another, too many to count. Some bones still had scraps of tattered fabric clinging to them, and on some skulls, I could see the same scorched marks as the footprints Danny had left behind. "This is their graveyard," Marcus whispered, his voice filled with horror. "We've stepped into the domain of the dead." But the worst was yet to come. From deep within the pit, something massive began to emerge, a towering black shadow with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It had no defined shape, just a dense, swirling mass of darkness, moving slowly yet with an undeniable force. A monstrous, guttural laughter echoed from its maw, a sound that seemed to tear through the very air around us. "This is why they call this place the Devil's Forest," Ryan muttered, his voice shaking. "It feeds on the souls of those who wander in." We tried to run, but every step we took only brought us closer to the pit. The ghostly figures were closing in, surrounding us from all sides. They didn't attack directly, but their presence alone felt like an invisible force, pushing us forward. "Jack, do you have a crucifix?" Marcus yelled, panic in his eyes. I fumbled through my pocket, finding a small cross my mother had given me before I left home. I raised it high, and a blinding light burst forth from it, forcing the ghostly figures to recoil. The monstrous entity shrieked in agony, retreating back into the pit. "Go! Now!" Ryan shouted. We ran like hell, not knowing where we were going, only that we had to escape no matter what. But just as we thought we were safe, a whisper echoed right next to my ear. "You will return, all of you will return." We ran like mad, our feet crushing decayed leaves and sinking into the muddy ground, our ragged breaths blending with the pounding of our hearts. The faint light of dawn began to filter through the canopy, but it brought no sense of safety. The whisper still echoed in my head, like a curse that could never be erased. "You will return, all of you will return." At last, we found a narrow trail leading out of the forest. It was overgrown with weeds and worn down by time, but it was our only hope. Ryan led the way, still holding his useless compass, though now the morning light gave us a better sense of direction. "Don't look back!" Marcus shouted as I instinctively turned my head, but I couldn't stop myself. Behind us, the fog still hung thick, and the shadowy figures remained, watching our every step. They didn't follow, but their pitch-black eyes seemed to pierce through my soul, pulling me back toward them. As we stepped out of the forest, the bright sunlight suddenly engulfed us. The air felt fresher, and birdsong echoed in the distance. We stopped, gasping for breath, trying to calm ourselves. But then, Ryan looked down at his hand, the compass he had been holding all night, only to find that it was gone. Not only that, but when we checked our belongings, everything we had brought from the forest was missing. Weapons, communication devices, even the crucifix I had used to repel that entity. "What the hell happened?" Marcus asked, his voice unsteady. Ryan didn't answer. He just stared at the forest we had escaped from. It looked completely normal now, as if nothing terrifying had ever occurred there. But I knew better than anyone. Everything we had experienced was real. A few days later, a rescue team found us and brought us back to base. No one believed our story. They said Danny had died in an accident in the forest, and that what we recounted was nothing more than hallucinations caused by stress and exhaustion. But I knew the truth. I still heard the whispers every night, and sometimes when I looked in the mirror, I saw Danny's face. His eyes pitch black, his twisted smile, standing right behind me. A month later, a strange letter arrived at my house. Inside, there was only a single handwritten sentence, scrawled in uneven strokes. "They are waiting for you." And beneath those words was a strange symbol, like a pit filled with bones, with a towering shadow standing in the center. I never went back to that forest. But sometimes on stormy nights, I hear footsteps echoing through my house, as if someone or something is searching for me. And then one morning, I woke up and realized I couldn't remember when I had fallen asleep. On the bedside table, Ryan's compass lay there, its needle pointing east toward the forest that still waits. A strange radio signal led us to a place where no one was ever meant to set foot. I am Thomas Reed, a member of the Green Berets deployed to Afghanistan on a reconnaissance mission. That night, while we were camping in a remote area, our radio suddenly picked up a strange signal, a repeating Morse code transmission. At first, we thought it was just interference or a technical glitch, but when we decoded it, the message sent chills down our spines. "Don't come here." The signal seemed to be coming from an abandoned military base about 10 kilometers east of our position. According to the map, this place was once a Cold War-era biological weapons testing facility, but it had been shut down after an accident of unknown cause. There were no official records of what had happened there. "We can't ignore this," Captain Miller said, his eyes filled with determination. "If someone is still alive there, we have to rescue them." But not everyone agreed. Marcus, our team sniper, shook his head firmly. "This is a trap. That message wasn't a warning. It was a threat." Still, the final decision was Miller's. We packed up our gear and began marching toward the base. As we moved deeper into the mountains, the air grew colder and heavier. There were no signs of life, no birds, no wind, just an eerie silence pressing down on us. And then we saw it, the base, nestled in a desolate valley, surrounded by towering mountains. The old buildings, covered in dust and overgrown with moss, stood like ghosts frozen in time. But the most terrifying thing was, there were no signs of human presence. As we stepped into the base, the sense of unease grew stronger. The windows of the buildings were shattered, and the interiors were pitch black, illuminated only by the faint glow of our flashlights. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if the place had been abandoned for decades. But strangely, there were no signs of destruction, no animal corpses, no human remains, nothing. "Too quiet," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "This isn't natural." We split up to explore different sections of the base. In the main laboratory, we found scorched documents detailing biological experiments. Some surviving pages described a virus engineered to alter human DNA, designed to create perfect soldiers for warfare. But the project had failed disastrously, leading to an incident that resulted in the entire base being sealed off. "This feels like something straight out of a horror movie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But things got worse when we heard it. Soft footsteps, but not human ones. The sound echoed from all directions, as if we were being surrounded. Then we saw them, grotesque creatures, twisted and malformed, part human, part beast. Their eyes burned a deep, menacing red, and their teeth were razor sharp. They moved slowly, but every step radiated a lethal sense of danger. "Run!" Miller shouted. We sat in the locked room, trying to stay calm, but the banging on the door grew louder. The mutated creatures, those half-human, half-beast abominations with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth, kept trying to break through. The sound of claws scraping against the metal surface echoed through the room, as if they were toying with us, playing a twisted game of cat and mouse. "We can't stay here forever," Marcus said, his voice trembling. They'll break through any moment now. Miller scanned the room, searching for a way out. In the corner, we discovered an old map of the base, marked with an underground tunnel leading outside. It was our only hope. "Where does this tunnel lead?" I asked, pointing at the map. Miller frowned. "It goes beyond the quarantine zone, but the problem is, no one knows what's waiting for us down there." With no other choice, we decided to take the risk. We packed our gear and braced ourselves for the dangerous journey ahead. When we opened the door, the creatures were gone, or at least they had retreated for now. But the uneasy feeling remained, as if they were lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. We made our way toward the tunnel, our flashlights casting weak beams of light into the pitch-black corridor. The air inside was freezing and heavy, carrying an almost suffocating presence. Our footsteps echoed through the space, each step making us fear we were drawing attention to ourselves. And then we saw it, a massive steel door tightly sealed. Deeply engraved on its surface in Russian were the words, "Do not open." "This is where it all started," Miller whispered, his eyes tense. "They locked it to keep something inside." But upon closer inspection, we realized the door had been broken from the inside. A large crack ran along the steel surface, and beyond it, there was only darkness. "We have to keep moving," Marcus said, though his voice wavered. "There's no other way." We stepped through the door, and that was when everything fell apart. Inside was a vast chamber, filled with shattered test tubes and destroyed laboratory equipment. But the most terrifying thing was, the creatures weren't the only result of the virus. At the center of the room lay a colossal entity, a grotesque mass of flesh, writhing and twisted, covered in hundreds of long, pulsating tendrils and countless glowing red eyes. It didn't move, yet its mere presence made the air thick and oppressive, as if it was consuming the very space around it. "That's the source of everything," Miller murmured, his voice filled with horror. "It's not just a creature, it's a fusion of everything that's ever been infected." And then it woke up. The monstrous mass began to stir, its tendrils slithering outward, reaching into every corner of the room. A deafening roar erupted, a sound so powerful it felt like reality itself was being torn apart. We turned to run, but the tendrils struck first. One of them lashed out, coiling around Marcus's leg and dragging him toward the entity. "Help me!" Marcus screamed, but there was nothing we could do. He was pulled into the creature's gaping maw, and his screams echoed into the darkness. We ran like mad through the pitch-black hallways, but the entity never stopped chasing us. Its tendrils pierced through walls and ceilings, reaching out in an attempt to seize us. With every step, we were pushed further toward despair. At last, we found an escape, a ladder leading up to the surface. But as we climbed, we realized we were far from safe. Outside, the sky was pitch dark, and the mutated creatures had gathered around, as if they had been waiting for us. "We have to find a way to destroy it," Miller said, his voice filled with determination. "If we don't, it will spread to the world." We turned back, searching for any remaining weapons in the base. Eventually, we discovered an old generator system that was still functional. If we could activate it, we could use the energy to obliterate the entity. "This is too risky," I said, my voice trembling. "If we fail, we die." "We have no other choice," Miller replied. We split up. Miller and I would activate the generator while the others distracted the entity. As we ran through the corridors, the tendrils lashed out relentlessly, but we pressed on toward our goal. At last, we managed to activate the generator. A blinding flash of light filled the room, and the entity began to convulse, as if in agony. Its tendrils retracted, and the massive mass of flesh slowly disintegrated into ashes. But our victory was short-lived. As we emerged from the base, we realized the virus was still alive. Some of the mutated creatures had survived, and they were closing in on us. Days later, we were rescued and brought back to base. But deep down, I knew we weren't truly safe. The virus had escaped the facility, and it could be anywhere. And then one morning, I woke up, realizing I had no memory of when I had fallen asleep. On the table beside my bed, a Morse code message was written in blood. "Don't come here." Thank you for watching till the end of the video. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next terrifying tales. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or suggestions to help us improve. See you in the next video, and have a peaceful night.